Just to set an expectation, like today's not any legal advice, not meant to be a compliance session. We're talking practical things in your hiring workflows where breakdowns happen and how to prevent some of those mistakes from turning into bigger operational problems. I'm Lauren. I'm the content manager here at GreenShays. Joined with me today is Star. She works hands-on with E-Verify case processing with our support team. And so she has seen lots of things that have gone wrong. So she knows exactly what advice to give you to help your workflows. All right. So we're going to start with why hiring compliance feels so high pressure now. Not scary one, but ground why we're having this session. Then we'll start with the I-9. And then from there, we'll talk about I-9 breakdowns and how those errors flow into E-Verify and why it's so much easier to prevent issues than to fix them after the fact. We'll be having a conversational E-Verify in practice session with Star, where I'll ask her a set of questions based on what she sees daily. And so you can hear, like I said, firsthand, some tips and tricks she knows really help improve those workflows. If you're responsible for any part of your hiring workflows, the challenge usually is the process is moving really fast and it's easy for something to slip. So today we're focusing on those breakdown points and prevention. So why are we talking about this now? Hiring compliance is not a quiet admin function. Federal I-9 audits continue to be a reality for employers across industries and across sizes. Civil penalties for I-9 violations add up quickly. And honestly, some of those violations can be as simple as fines for just missing or incomplete forms. The reality is what makes all this so challenging is that many penalties stem from just basic documentation errors, not any form of intentional misconduct. In other words, those operational mistakes quickly become financial consequences, and that's why we want to stop them before they start. And then lastly, E-Verify usage has expanded. If you're using it now, it might be because some states operate in requirement, contracts require it. But honestly, it's also a good proactive tool in your hiring workflow, so you might just be doing it for that reason. But once you've incorporated it, regardless of the reason why, it adds another compliance layer that must be managed consistently. So as we all know, the foundation Form I-9 is the baseline employment eligibility requirement in the United States. It must be completed within 3 business days of the employee start. But the crazy part is, and the reason that risk kind of builds quietly, is that the I-9 isn't filed with the government. You all retain it internally. So you can be doing everything fine for months until an audit happens and suddenly you're expected to produce forms and prove that all the process was followed perfectly. That's why process discipline matters. Compliance depends on doing it right even when no one is checking you. So I'm building on top of that. E-Verify is built on top of that information that you collect in the I-9. What's important to understand is that E-Verify is not a separate process from the I-9. So that means that the accuracy of the I-9 is incredibly important because the information entered there is what gets submitted into the E-Verify system. Basically, the I-9 creates the record, E-Verify validates the information in that record. So E-Verify doesn't replace the I-9, it reinforces it. And it can surface issues earlier, which is why many employers can use it as a double check. Throughout all of these processes, there is risk and breakdowns that happen. Because the I-9 remains internal, errors can go unnoticed. Processes can become inconsistent without you even realizing it. Documentation may be incomplete. And those compliance failures usually happen because hiring is busy. Y'all have a lot on your plate. And because there's probably a lot of handoffs too. So we often see breakdowns where someone completes the I-9 late, the E-Verify case doesn't get created within the time frame it needs to be. A TNC ends up happening and no one's sure who is in charge of the next step. And all of these that we're talking about, these are not dramatic failures. They're just simple operational cracks. But those small cracks can eventually surface later in payroll, reporting, or audit. That was all kind of gloom and doom. But the good news is when on the E-Verify side, when everything is entered correctly, so you handle the I-9 the right way, the documentation flows, the E-Verify case gets submitted, the majority of cases resolve quickly. Nearly 98% of E-Verify cases are confirmed as work authorized within 24 hours. But that small percentage that don't become approved are very operationally heavy. You have to manage notifications, deadlines, follow-up, documentation. So prevention matters because correction is a process. Correction is a time-sensitive workflow. You have to follow up with the employee, etc. This is not to overwhelm anyone. It's just to show why being careful upfront saves time and stress later. So no matter what, it's important to just focus on those small things, getting everything handled within the processing timeline, because it is easier to prevent a mismatch than to manage one. Now that we've set the foundation, I9 is the baseline, E-Verify is the validation, let's make it real. Star works with E-Verify cases every day. She sees the patterns, the common mistakes, and the issues that generate the most tickets and rework. So I'm going to walk through a set of themes with Star in a Q&A style. One of the things that we keep coming back to is that automation helps, but it does not eliminate employer responsibility. And Star, you mentioned in our prep conversation that some clients think that once the employee fills out the I-9, everything automatically flows into E-Verify. So can you explain what still needs to happen?
So employers still need to review the I-9 before it's submitted. That means they need to confirm that the information entered on by the employee is correct. The document type selected matches the document information are accurate. In most cases, the system is receiving data, not the physical documents themselves. So the employer is still responsible for verifying that the document presented matches what's in the system. This review step is important because once the case is submitted to E-Verify, incorrect information can lead to mismatches or delays. Another operational point is that employers must submit the I-9 for processing. Some clients assume the system automatically submits the case once the employee completes their portion, but that's not always the case. If the form isn't reviewed and submitted, the E-Verify case can't run.
Thanks, Star. And Rhonda, I hope that answers your question that I see in the Q&A, where is it possible to do E-Verify after the I-9 has been completed? The I-9 is the first step. Then you take that information and submit it to E-Verify, however that works for your organization. Next question. So the one thing that we've noticed in preparing for this webinar is that many of the issues that you see aren't complicated compliance problems. They're often small, preventable data entry errors. So Star, what are some of the most common mistakes you see?
Many of the issues come down to data entry mistakes. Examples include social security numbers that are entered incorrectly, names that are entered differently from how they appear on official records, dates of birth entered incorrectly. Another very common issue involves missing document numbers, particularly for non-US citizen documentation. And some immigration cards require multiple identifiers, and sometimes only one of those numbers is entered. So for example, a card may require one number from the front and another identifier from the back. If one of those numbers is missing, the case is more likely to trigger a mismatch. Another common issue involves name formatting, especially with suffixes. Suffixes like junior, senior, the third, the fourth are not technically part of the legal last name field. And when they're entered incorrectly as part of the last name, that can often lead to a tentative non-confirmation mismatch as well.
Yeah, those are some simple things that probably make for big errors. And if you just review it quickly, hopefully you can catch some of them. I know I kind of teased the next slide. I accidentally hit the next buttons, but oh, I'm frozen. Am I back? Okay. Apologies, y'all. I seem to be having some technical difficulties. Hi, y'all. Am I back?
Mhm.
Yep.
Yes.
My whole computer froze there. So that's always fun when that happens on a webinar with people watching. So seriously, apologies about that. We're going to dive into our next section now. In that last slide, Star, you did talk about some document mismatches. So can you go a little bit into depth about what that looks like in practice?
So one common scenario is when the document type selected in the form doesn't match the document provided. So for example, if an employee selects the passport from list A, but the image upload is actually their driver's license. In situations like this, the case can't move forward until the documentation is corrected. So sometimes the issue is just simply selecting that wrong document category. For example, an employee may have provided list B and list C documents, but the form was completed as if it were a list A document. In those cases, the I-9 has to be corrected before the E-Verify case can be run, and this can create delays and additional steps that could have been avoided with careful document review.
So even when some of those issues do slip through the cracks, which I know that they're going to, it happens to everyone. TNCs, these are something that employers worry about, especially when they first encounter them. But as we talked about in our prep, they don't always mean something is wrong. So can you explain what usually leads to a TNC and how employers should think about them?
A tentative non-confirmation simply means that the system wasn't able to immediately verify the information. It doesn't automatically mean that the employee is not authorized to work. Some cases require additional verification with agencies like DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, the Social Security Administration, but in many cases, the issue comes down to data mismatches. Examples could include where the incorrect Social Security number was entered, the name is different across multiple records. They could have incorrect documentation numbers, name changes are not reflected across all documents. And I think name changes is probably one of the most common reasons that a case triggers a TNC. And basically, if an employee's name is different across different systems of records, the system may not be able to match it immediately. But once a TNC occurs, there is a structured process for notifying the employee and resolving the issue.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're nothing to be scared of, but it's always that double check on the front end is going to save you a lot of time. And our last question, another area where employers can run into trouble is timing. So can you talk about the expectations around when cases should be submitted?
E-Verify cases are expected to be submitted within 3 days of the employee's start date. When submissions happen consistently outside of that window, the system may flag the account. In some cases, E-Verify may send warning emails about those late submissions, and if the issue continues, they may even threaten to terminate the account due to noncompliance. Reactivating an account after termination can be a time-consuming process, and in many cases, the employer may need to re-enroll in the program. So this is why reviewing and submitting the I-9 forms promptly is so important.
Makes sense. Not only is it what you're expected to do with the employee's information, but also the E-Verify portal may be like, you haven't been doing it right. We're going to create bigger issues for you. So you might as well follow the protocol. All right. Thanks, Star. That was all really helpful information. I apologize about that random glitch in the middle, but I think we covered a lot of what happens with E-Verify in practice and some of those really important things people can do to make sure that their process runs smoothly. And what I want to do now is connect these operational breakdowns back to payroll, because that's where you can sometimes feel the impact. Because even though I-9 and E-Verify are often owned by HR, the consequences don't just stay in HR. They will surface later in payroll, reporting, the employee experience, and audit exposure. When hiring compliance breaks down, payroll often becomes the place where the problem finally shows up. For example, delayed first paychecks. If onboarding documentation isn't completed correctly or E-Verify cases aren't resolved smoothly, payroll timing can be affected. And that's one of the fastest ways to damage employee trust. We also see incorrect employee records or tax setup. If the data entered during onboarding is inconsistent, payroll may end up correcting information later, which creates a bunch of rework. And that rework is costly, not just in time, but in coordination between teams. One of the biggest operational challenges that payroll teams are often left dealing with issues they didn't create because the breakdown happened earlier in the hiring process. And finally, there's audit exposure. Hiring compliance audits often look backwards, meaning payroll and HR may be asked months later to produce documentation and prove processes were followed. So the goal isn't just compliance for compliance sake. The goal is preventing downstream disruption. So what can employers actually do with all this now that we've covered all of these problems? The best solution is building a more resilient process. And that starts with clear ownership. Who owns I-9 completion? After that, who owns E-Verify case creation? Who owns TNC follow-up? And who monitors renewals? The next thing to keep in mind is establish standard timeline. If case creation is time sensitive, it needs to be part of the onboarding workflow and not an afterthought. And of course, documentation. Having consistent internal process documentation is one of the best ways to reduce confusion and strengthen audit readiness. And lastly, integrated system. The fewer manual handoffs, the fewer opportunities for breakdown. This is where HR and payroll alignment become a real operational advantage. Everything we talked about today, the I-9 process, E-Verify verification, and downstream payroll impact exists across multiple systems for many organizations. Green Shades helps bring those pieces together. Our workforce management platform allows organizations to manage onboarding, I-9 compliance, E-Verify workflows, and payroll data in a connected environment. That helps reduce manual entry, improves visibility across HR and payroll teams, and helps organizations maintain stronger documentation if an audit ever occurs. It's really about supporting the process we discussed today. If your current system or process isn't working for you, I want to ask, would you like to speak with our team about GreenShades HR and/or payroll solution? I'm going to ask that. I'm going to pop up a poll, and I just saw it. There you go. I'm going to pop up this poll. If you want to take a few minutes to think that through, that'd be awesome. In the meantime, I'm going to go on to our next slide. I have a couple more things to cover while y'all think about that. Something interesting I wanted to point out while I was doing the research, something about E-Verify Plus. This is a new offering that has come up from the E-Verify platform. With E-Verify Plus, employers can send new hires a secure link where the employees complete their Form I-9 and upload documentation directly in the E-Verify system. We just had a question about it, like what is the advantage of that? Because it sounds great. And I will say it is something for your organization to look at and consider. But what happens is the process happens outside of your HR payroll system in the E-Verify portal. So basically it separates the process. So it introduces another system that employees and HR teams interact with. That's something that works for y'all. Great. We found that as the employer agent for our clients, that is, we're not looking into E-Verify Plus at all. So what to keep in mind? This means that the I-9 process may live in a different platform than the rest of your onboarding workflow, which could add another system for y'all to manage. Just something I found interesting as I was doing my research. All right, thanks for considering that poll. I'm gonna give you one more minute as I do the key takeaways, and I'll take it down. So if you take away 3 things from today, hiring compliance failures are usually process failures. The work moves fast and steps get missed. Second, the I-9 is the foundation. E-Verify validates the data and helps surface issues earlier. Third, catching issues early protects payroll timing, reduces rework, and strengthens your audit. In our follow-up email, after today's session, we'll have a recap and follow-up, and in that we will include a resource. I have a complete guide to I-9 and E-Verify that goes into a little bit more detail about both those processes for your reference. So if you're interested in that, that will be included in tomorrow's follow-up. All right, I know we finished a little early today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. But I appreciate you all being here today. If there's anything ever GreenShades can do for you, you let us know. Thanks, y'all.